This is post-editing me. Turns out that I actually forgot to put the sound on for this, and so here I am showing you a winter check-in for the breeder bin, which is the small white bin, and the big tote, which is the Growout bin. Now, if you've been here before, you'll have seen that I got a massive amount of pure red wigglers, and that what I did when I got them was that I took out 20 huge breeders and I put them in this small bin. So what I'm about to do here is find one of those large breeders. Here we go. And you can tell that he's a large breeder by this raised section. There you go, that's the clitellum. Now this is a lovely big fat worm, and you can tell that he's a red wiggler by that very distinctive yellow tail. Now actually these are hermaphrodites, but they do need to breed to be able to produce the cocoons. And what I wanted to show you is something else in a moment, a comparison. So this large worm is going to go back into this breeder bin, and you can see it's quite active. It's actually below freezing here at the moment. So I'm going to put him back in there, and as I'm just having a check around, I'm looking to see how much food they've got in there. Now this is my pre-composted bedding that they're in, and that's what I'm explaining here. So I'm looking to see how much I need to feed them. This is the Growout bin. This big tote, it's got air holes around the outside of it. I've no idea what I'm actually saying here, so I'm winging this, so please bear with me. There I'm explaining the air holes. My son did this for me. And what I've done is I've taken all of the wisps, the baby worms and the cocoons out of this breeder bin. There you go. I'm just explaining this is a piece of food left over. Every time you go to feed your worms, you want to see how much food is left over from the last feed before you feed them again. This is pre-composted bedding. I've got a link for that. If you've not seen how I make it, I'll put it down in the description. But the worms will also eat this too. Now at the moment, it's my winter. So these worms, although they're quite active in here, they're not actually composting this not as quickly as in the tower, especially in this little bin, because, you know, there's not a huge amount of them in there. Like I said, I started with 20, and so they're not going to get through that bedding in the same way as a large amount of worms. I'm pointing out here that this is a smaller breeder, but you can see that there's a difference in size, but that doesn't matter. So all I'm feeding here is kitchen scraps. Then I'm going to put in some of my homemade worm chow. Just a little sprinkling of that. You don't want to feed too much, but it keeps them nice, fat and healthy. And then the obligatory eggshell. They have a gizzard. They need that to grind things up just like a chicken, but also it regulates the acidity. Now here is what I wanted to show you. I'm having a lot of work done here at the moment, which is digging up the concrete and causing a lot of vibrations. And this is a blue worm. I found it on the concrete, and this is why I set my breeder bin up in the first place, because these escape all of the time, and I find a lot of them dead. You can see that they're a smaller, finer worm, even though this is one of the juveniles, but they're very sensitive to pressure changes. I'm right next to the water table, and so when it rains a lot, which it does here where I live, these will evacuate. Now you can see how dark and blue this is to the worm I just showed you, and it doesn't have that distinctive yellow tail. Now I just put this on top of the bin. I found it on the concrete, so it's lucky to be alive. But I wanted to show you, I'm not going to leave it in this bin. I'm actually going to put it back in the other tower. But this is the reason why I wanted to set this breeder bin up, so that I'd got more wrigglers. Because one of the other things these blues can do when they're happy is they can outcompete the reds in breeding. Now they're great composting worms, don't get me wrong, but I actually prefer these big red wigglers because they're just not as sensitive to the vibrations here. And I also live in a mining town, and so we get a lot of quarry blasts. So I'm just putting it back in the tower here before I move on to dealing with this grow out bin. And so here I'm just having a little dig down. And here you go. This is actually one of the juveniles that's grown out. And you can see that exceptionally distinctive yellow tipped tail and how much paler this is compared to that other worm. Now, I only set this bin up last year, so you can see how much more quickly this worm has grown. And these are still quite active worms for how cold it is as well at the moment. So they deal a lot better with my temperature changes as well. And you can see that it's getting towards adulthood. It's still not got that exceptionally raised clitellum, but it's getting there. And so shortly, once it warms up a bit more, I'm going to go through this grow out bin and I'm going to remove these bigger worms and put them into the tower with the others so that they can get on and help them composting in there. So I'm just having a quick check. Don't want to disturb these worms too much because of how cold it is. I have been feeding these worms in the centre. Here's another, again with that distinctive yellow tip. But I've been feeding these worms in the centre, the same as all the others. And I'm about to find just a little grouping. And what I might do is I might put some of these into the adult breeder bin, just so they can help them produce more cocoons and more breeding separately from the others later in the year. Here I'm about to find, just like I did in the other bin, a little tiny bit of food, but what it's telling me is that these worms are ready for a feed, and so that's what we're going to do. Again, just something, little bit, sprouting. I don't know what this even is from the last feed, but there you go. I'm showing you what it's trying to do in the bin. I have no idea what that is, but it looks a little bit alien to me. And so we're going to feed them exactly the same as we did the other one. Just a little bit more, because obviously there are a lot more worms in here. There are cocoons that are still hatching. There are tiny little wisps. And so we need a bit of food for everybody in there. A bit more worm chow. And of course, the eggshell. Give it a little mix. And tuck them back up in bed. So I hope you found this useful. I hope you enjoyed seeing the comparison between the blue worms and the red wigglers. I am putting this bubble wrap back on here simply because in the summer I take this breeder bin out and I leave it open, so it's to retain the moisture. If I take this off here and leave it somewhere in this building, it's going to get lost, possibly thrown away. I've got, you know, the memory not of an elephant but of a goldfish, so I'm going to leave it in there. I hope to see you next time. I hope you'll like, share and subscribe this, and I hope you'll come back for the next instalment. Bye for now.